So as we move on, a different part of the showroom. This is sort of, this area is for some of my stuff and also for customers, some of the customers' cars. And these are something that that my grandfather also had a connection with me and these cars. I remember going to the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles and seeing the auto shows back in 1959, 58, 1960. And the center point of those shows, in addition to the new cars, would be one-off dream cars, or concept cars as they're called today. And this one that you're looking at right now is called Barqueta. It is a one-off design exercise, fully functional. It was built and designed at Ford's International Design Center, GIA, which is in Turin, Italy. So it's all hand-formed metal panels. Workmanship is really superb on it. You look at things like these little louvers, accents. I mean, they're just perfectly done, beautifully done. This car was shown for a couple of years. It was intended to be a car that was an elemental, soft top, drop top convertible in the vein of a Porsche Boxster, Speedster, or an MGTD. And at the time that this was built and shown in 1981 and 1982, the sort of consumer friendly price-wise sports car didn't exist. There were some exotic ones, Ferraris and Maseratis, and very expensive cars, but the American manufacturers had stopped making convertibles. And so this was an attempt to come up with a solution to that, and it was very, very popular. It had a club called the Barqueta Club based in Germany, which had something like 10,000 members, and they had lobbied Ford to try to get this car built. And they kept saying they'll build it. They never did. In 1990, they ended up building a called the Ford Capri, which was a real mashup of what this car might have been. It was a car that should have been, but never was. One of a kind. This is another prototype from the early 80s. It's called the Quicksilver. It's a Lincoln. It's a design exercise, again by GIA. Ford did not participate. They put their badging on it, but it was not something they made. And this has a mid-engine. It's made on an ME3000 AC chassis, transverse mounted. Just a design exercise. It was shown at the international auto shows for probably 4 or 5 years. It was used in publicity. Over on the wall is 3 cars and that Ford used. I own all 3 of them too. One is at the Petersen Museum right now. So you've got, or 2 of them are really. This is the Quicksilver over here, Probe 1, and this is Barqueta, or Brezza, excuse me, which was the first car designed by a woman. And so anyway, Ford used these cars for advertising and to have people think that they were on to the future, and this is what cars might look like. So they're one of a kind. I have about a dozen of these, and I've collected them over the years. As I said, my grandfather got me interested in these because I saw not these cars, but I saw the Motorama cars and the Ford cars and Chrysler cars, the Idea cars back in the 50s, and I just always thought these were absolutely the coolest cars you could possibly own. Now this is a complete Ford. These 2 cars here are totally Ford design. They're not associated with GIA. He's looking at those are fiber optic lights. It has a high voltage lighting also. It's a transverse mounted 8-cylinder straight 8 engine that called it a T-drive. It was really an engineering car that they kind of went wild on the bodywork. It's asymmetrical side to side, and pretty cool. They built a running prototype of the chassis. The T-drive never came came to fruition. This is probably the only example of it. And it's a four-seater, you know, pretty wild looking. Yeah, it's I think and beautifully done. Ford's craftsmen in their special projects section, well, they did this. This was done 1991, so it's like almost 30 years old, and it's still in stunning condition. There's not a crack or, you know, nothing. You know, it's a lot of the prototypes are built out of wood and Bondo and chicken wire, and just, you know, made to look nice on a stand, never thinking that the car would be driven or used. But all the cars that I have pretty much were really nicely engineered, and three of the cars are at the museum right now, Petersen Museum. The Brezza, which is the first car ever that was designed start to finish by a woman in 1982. The Probe 1, which is probably the first car that led to a complete change in the industry with the introduction of the Ford Taurus, you know, about 5 years later. And then the Probe 5, which is a complete wild futuristic exercise. All of these cars belong to Ford, and they were in their warehouse in Dearborn. After they were used in the auto shows, they pretty much were put away. They gathered dust. Ford really didn't use them at all. And in 2001, there was a change in the leadership at Ford Design, and its decision was made to sell all of their prototypes. So they had, I think, over 50 prototypes that they auctioned off. And that was on Father's Day in 1991. I happened to go to it. I heard about it through a friend of mine. And at the time, I couldn't believe that Ford would actually be selling any of their their concept cars. I thought they were probably small-scale models or drawings, and anyway, they cleaned house. So I bought 6 of them that day, and over the last 20 years, as they've come up for sale, and I had the money, I purchased another 6 or 7. So, but they're all fascinating. You know, they all fit into the history of automotive design somewhere. Some are more significant than others. Some will be forgotten, and some of these won't. Some of them were game changers for the whole industry. This is the Cougar S. It's a Mercury prototype. It's high performance. It's got a special engine in it that's hot rodded. It's got a wide body on it. The idea, I think, was to make a Cougar that was, that the hot rodders would like. And I think what happened was they finally decided with this car that what was the purpose in making like a Cougar, because they already had Mustangs that were muscle cars, and so they would compete directly with the Mustangs. And so this was done in 1991. It did all the international auto shows, and then was put away. And it's fully functional. I've taken it out and driven it. Most of these cars are not something, the ones that are fully functional, you just wouldn't drive them. They're not engineered, fully engineered. In fact, I had to sign, it was like it was an agreement with Ford that absolved them from any liability, because I think probably the biggest thing that the problem they have with selling prototypes is the liability issue. So the GM prototypes, rather than being sold back in the 50s and 60s, they were crushed or taken to a wrecking yard. And there was a few people that heard about this and brought them back to life. These never got crushed. So I guess the good thing is that they're all in private hands now and loved by new owners. And very rarely do you see them come up for sale. Out of the 50, maybe a handful have come up over the years. I don't know where they've gone, but they're in collections someplace, but you just don't see them. And we just started, to show these, take them out to some concours, and fortunate enough to have 3 of them at the Petersen Museum, which is just a fabulous place. It's got to be one of the best, if not the best, auto museums certainly I've ever seen, and always has interesting exhibits. And you can go see the dinosaurs after that down the road a little bit. I guess it was they call it La Brea Tar Pits. Yeah. So so I have a collection of guitars. I was once going to be a singer-songwriter. Well, that didn't pan out, but the bodywork did. So I have a few of those hanging up. I just like a lot of different things. I got interested in aerodynamics. Owned a car called the Ghia Streamline, which was a design prototype about aerodynamics, and so I found a little air tunnel. They're actually fully functional. You can test models in it, it's got pretty interesting stuff, at least to me. This is when I was 9 years old. A kid up the street, his name was Bobby Holiday, when I lived in San Fernando, had one of these things. It's called a Whizzer, and they were made just after the war. You bolted, for $50, you bought a kit, and you bolted all of the motor and the gas tank and the belt drive onto a Schwinn bicycle, and you had it's like I guess a motorbike. And they made a ton of them. But anyway, Bobby had one, and I wished I could have one, and so, about 30 years ago, one came up for sale, and I bought it, and I used it for a long time. I drive it into the beach. We're not too far from the beach, and it's a real hoot to drive. This is one of the first radios that came out in, I think this is 1910. They ran off a 6-volt car battery. It's pretty primitive, but compared to the electronics today, this was one of the first, I think this was first year of production. This is an old jukebox, plays albums, which is kind of different. It's made by Seeberg, which is a big, they were very successful in the old jukebox thing, but they also made albums, so it has 50 albums in there you can play. And this is, I like old boats. I have a 1912 America's Cup boat designed by George Crouch, and this is another of his designs, which at that time they were the fastest boats in the world. And this is just, can't afford the real one here, but this is one of the very first of those. Well, thanks a lot for taking a look at my collection, and next time we'll go into the restoration workshop.
Thanks for watching. Make sure to click subscribe, comment, and like for more videos like this one.